In this video, we're going to be answering some of the biggest questions for this weekend's UFC card, including whether or not Islam Makhachev can take Jack Della Maddalena down after Maddalena's fantastic performance in his last fight against Belal Muhammad, and also whether Leon Edwards has still got what it takes to compete against the best guys in the division. It's old school versus new school as a former champ Leon Edwards takes on one of the best up-and-coming strikers in the division. Ian Gary gave Prates problems, so will Leon Edwards as well. Is it one of those you almost have forgot fights, or will Prates be too much for Edwards? We're going to be answering all these questions, as well as taking a deep dive into all of the main card fights at UFC 322 from a betting perspective, and I hope you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions, maybe even earn some extra cash. And if you want to make cash on almost every single UFC event, all you need to do is join my live betting group. I can show you some impressive numbers. We make a profit on 73% of months and on 68% of UFC events. So you can see this profit chart dates back almost 10 years. It's very, very impressive, and we're currently in the middle of a nice steady uptrend where we've been consistently making money pretty much all year. I think we've made a profit on about 70% of events in 2025, and this weekend's card is absolutely brilliant. So I'm very confident that we'll make another profit on Saturday night. So yeah, if you don't want to do the thinking yourself, if you don't want to research fights yourself, if you don't want to go through the stress of worrying, if your bankroll is going to go on these crazy swings, break-even streaks, losing streaks, the up and downs, the highs and lows of gambling, if you want nice, steady, consistent profits, almost every single month of the year, 73% of months are profitable for us, and on top of that, very, very rare do you have to experience any downside, any downswings, or anything like that. You can see we've been very consistent over the last 10 years. This is the biggest dip that we've been through in the last 10 years, going back 18 months or so. That was actually caused by a technical issue with the stream delay, the stream latency that I was watching the fights on. That's what led to the dip. But as you can see, we've bounced back very nicely, and we continue to grind out profits most week again. This dip was only a 14-unit drawdown as well. So when you look at the big picture and how consistent we've been over the last 10 years, just a scratch, absolutely nothing. And so yeah, if you want to make money betting on the UFC most weeks, join my live betting group, link in the description below. You will absolutely love it. You won't be disappointed. Most of the guys in the group have been with me for years and years and years and years and years. But for now, while you're pondering whether to join the team, whether to make money most weeks betting on the sport you love, we're going to be diving into the main event of this weekend's card, which is going to be Jack Della Maddalena versus Islam Makhachev. And if you do join the live betting group, you also gain access to this fantastic research tool which I've built, which you can find on the website. If you just go to tools in the nav bar, you can click here. We've got Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonner advertising this brilliant tool for us, so you can just click here. It'll bring you to the research tool where you've got everything you need to analyze these fights. We'll use it throughout this video, and I'm sure you'll appreciate it. Definitely speeds up the fight research process. It makes everything a lot easier because everything is presented in front of you. So we'll start off as ever by taking a look at the odds. So Islam Makhachev is a 1.34 favourite, which is minus 297 for an implied probability of 75%. And if we take a look at the odds on Jack Della Maddalena, he's a 3.30 underdog, which is plus 230 for an implied probability of 30%. So doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand the dynamic between these two. It's striker versus grappler. If the fight stays standing, Maddalena will have a huge advantage. If the fight goes to the ground, Makhachev's going to have a huge advantage. So this fight's going to come down to which guy can keep the fight in the area where they have the big advantage. And the main question we need to answer as we break this fight down, how likely is it that Maddalena is going to be able to keep the fight standing? So we're going to be showing you some footage of his past fights to gauge the chances that he's got of doing that, and hopefully by the time we're finished breaking this fight down, you'll feel a lot more comfortable, a lot more confident in who you think is more likely to win. So as ever, we'll kick things off with the fighter comparison tool. We can see age is not really a factor in this fight, in my opinion. Makhachev is getting a little bit old for 33 years old. He's getting up there, but hasn't really taken a whole lot of damage in his career, so he's probably one of those guys that can perform to a high level for a little bit longer. Both guys about the same size. You can see the height, the reach, all the same. And then if we take a look at the stats, we are missing some stats for Jack Della Maddalena on this one, so we won't go through the stats comparison, but the stats have rendered for everyone else. One of the technical reason why some stats haven't rendered is because Jack Della Maddalena has 3 names instead of 2, which confuses my system a little bit when it's generating stats. So that's the reason why, the technical reason, but for everyone else we should have a good range of stats to go through. Anyway, we don't need those stats because what we're focusing on here, striker versus grappler, and whether or not Jack Della Maddalena is going to be able to keep the fight standing. So if you guys remember back when Jack Della Maddalena fought Belal Muhammad in his last fight, we spent a lot of time breaking that matchup down, and we looked at his fights against Basel Hafez and also against Gilbert Burns as fights that definitely highlighted that Jack Della Maddalena had quite a low-level ground game and his takedown defense wasn't the best. But if you go back and watch the breakdown from the Maddalena-Belal Muhammad fight, we identified that Maddalena just made very simple mistakes in the fights against Burns and Hafez, such as trying to defend takedowns with guillotines and stuff like that, which resulted in him getting taken down, ending up on his back a lot. But if he made just a few adjustments, fundamentally his takedown offense wasn't bad, and with just a few improvements, a few tweaks to the way he did things, he could potentially cause Belal Muhammad a lot of problems, and he did. There were still issues with Maddalena's takedown offense in the Belal Muhammad fight, which we will go into, but Maddalena improved by hundreds of % between the Basel Hafez and Gilbert Burns fight in terms of his takedown offense, and then between the Gilbert Burns and the Belal Muhammad fight, he improved hundreds of % again. So, granted, there was over a year between the Muhammad and Gilbert Burns fight, and almost a year, July 2023 to March 2024, between the Hafez and Burns fight. But we know, in terms of defensive wrestling and ground game, Maddalena does appear to be making exponential improvements from fight to fight. And we can see in the Belal Muhammad fight, he did defend 6 of 9 takedowns, which is pretty impressive because Muhammad is a good offensive wrestler. He's a big, strong guy. His takedown entries are very good. So stuffing 6 out of 9 takedowns against someone like Belal Muhammad is really impressive. Obviously, Makhachev is one of the best MMA grapplers in the history of the fucking sport. He's very good. But Maddalena's moving in the right direction. So we'll quickly gloss over the striking, and then we'll move on to showing you a little bit of footage and kind of explaining the chances that Maddalena's got of keeping this one standing. So in terms of striking, Maddalena is one of these guys who obviously is very aggressive on the feet, fights at a high pace, but I think one of Maddalena's biggest strengths is his cardio. So he's one of those guys that no matter how much energy he exerts, or how much of a war the fight is, how much damage he takes, how hurt he is, Maddalena is still a very capable striker no matter how tired he gets, how much energy is exerted. He's still technical, he's still aggressive, he's still very dangerous. And I think this gives him a big edge over Islam Makhachev because, you know, Makhachev had the staph infection going into the fight against Dustin Poirier and, you know, slowed down a bit against Dustin. But we've seen Makhachev slow in 2 fights where he got really sloppy on the feet in both those matchups. So the first time it happened was in the Alexander Volkanovski fight, all the way back in 2023. And then the next time it happened was in the Poirier fight. So in the Poirier fight, you could be like, oh, okay, he slowed down because of the staph infection. But then in the Volkanovski fight, there was no real excuse for him to slow down. He was fighting a much smaller opponent. And, you know, it just didn't make sense, you know, the reason why he would slow. The fight was contested at a very high pace, but the first Volkanovski fight kind of showed that if you make Makhachev work a little, he is the type of guy that could fade. So straight away, there's a path to victory there for Maddalena, because we know Maddalena is difficult to take down, and we know Makhachev will tire out potentially if you drag him into a tough fight. And so, if Maddalena can make Makhachev work really hard in the first half of the fight, to the point where Makhachev is too tired to get those takedowns in the second half of the fight, kind of how he was against Poirier, kind of how he was in the first Volkanovski fight, then Maddalena stands a chance of weaponizing his cardio in this one in kind of a similar way to what he did against both Belal Muhammad and, to a lesser degree, Gilbert Burns. So that's something to think about. If the fight goes deep, I trust Maddalena to perform to his full potential in rounds 4 and 5 much more than I do Makhachev. And obviously with Maddalena, there's a lot more danger in there if you get tired against Maddalena than there was against Poirier, who's much smaller than Maddalena, and also not as good of a defensive wrestler as Maddalena, and also much less, against much more danger in there against Maddalena than is against Volkanovski, who's like 5'6" and essentially a featherweight. Maddalena's a big old welterweight and he hits hard, right? Size matters. No disrespect to Volk or Poirier, but Maddalena's a different beast. So Maddalena's got a path to victory by weaponizing his cardio. So what we want to focus on now is the stand-up before we get into the footage of the grappling. And in terms of striking, Makhachev, he's not one of these grapplers, to be fair, these combat sambo guys that only has grappling. His striking's pretty good. He's a much better striker than Khabib. His footwork's good, movement's good, very technical. He's tough as well. He showed some durability against both Volk and Poirier, where both guys hurt him. Like I say, Maddalena's a different ball game to me. He's a lot more dangerous than those two guys, but Makhachev showed he's tough, durable, technical, moves well, but Maddalena's a great boxer, tough as nails, granite chin, and a lot more dangerous offensively than Makhachev. So for me, Maddalena has a big advantage on the feet. I think early on when they're both fresh, Makhachev can have success on the feet because he's good with his movement and good with the range. But the longer the fight goes, the more it favours Maddalena on the feet. As they start to get a little bit sloppier, Maddalena will be the one that will take advantage of that and look more effective with striking as the fight wears on. So, in terms of how these two match up when it comes to grappling and answering the question of whether or not Maddalena is going to be able to keep this fight standing, what we want to do is bring up his last fight against Belal Muhammad. I hate how it auto-plays the audio, but there we go. What we need to do is bring up his last fight against Belal Muhammad, and what we will do is skim through this fight to take a look at Maddalena's takedown offense in this one, and then we'll compare it to his takedown offense against Gilbert Burns. I don't want to go all the way back to the Basel Hafez fight because he's improved so much since Hafez. It's not worth watching. It's just a waste of our time. But we will show you the difference between Maddalena's takedown offense in this fight and the Burns fight. So you can see the improvement between the Burns and Muhammad fight to try and project the level of improvement you may get from Maddalena again in this matchup against Makhachev. But as I hit play here, I do want to start to talk about my findings from research, because obviously I've watched all these fights and I've done my research already, and I want to talk about how I personally see this one going based on what I've seen. And as I talk about how I see this one going from a grappling point of view, you're going to see for yourselves kind of the issues with Jack's defensive wrestling and ground game, which I think has a very good chance of getting him into a lot of trouble against Makhachev. So what I would say about Maddalena is his takedown offense is excellent. And this wasn't always the case. You go back and watch the Basel Hafez, Belal Muhammad fights, Maddalena's takedown offense wasn't good. But it is good now. It is good. And he does a good job of reading the takedown entries, seeing them come in pretty early, doing a good job of clearing his legs. And getting underhooks in play. Technically, Maddalena does almost everything right now with his takedown offense. It's very impressive, and you can see a nice deep entry here from Belal. And Maddalena does a really good job of quickly identifying the entry, coming, getting his back up tight to the cage, getting these underhooks in play early, and Belal kind of retreats on it. So one huge mistake Belal Muhammad made in this fight, and you'll see this as the fight wears on. He didn't use a whole lot of chain wrestling, and that's really where Belal and Makhachev can differ, because Makhachev has got some of the best chain wrestling in the history of MMA, and Belal didn't really chain takedowns together in this fight very much. So while the takedown entries from Belal were generally very good, when Maddalena shut down that initial entry, for the most part Belal kind of gave up. Now if that's Makhachev, he's going to be transitioning from double legs to single legs to body locks to inside trips to outside trips to back control. He's going to be trying to overwhelm you and chain different takedowns together, which obviously increases probability of getting a takedown, because Jack is, you know, not a natural wrestler, doesn't have bulletproof takedown defense. So that's how you're going to get a guy like Jack down, with some chain wrestling, and Belal didn't really chain wrestle. So you saw in that first round very much a single shot entry. There's another single shot entry there. Jack deals with it, clears his legs, and then Belal kind of gives up on it. So here's another entry here, minute and a half left to go in round 2. So Belal drives Maddalena into the cage, but look at how good this takedown offense is. So he sees the entry coming, and he immediately starts to lower his arms to get underhooks in play and clears the legs. Understands he needs to get his back tight to the cage to use the cage as a base to defend the takedown, and he just feeds Belal that single leg and immediately gets that underhook on the right side. Didn't go to the underhook on the right side. There he goes, underhook on the right side. And then again though, Belal kind of gives it up. He kind of gives it up. Like when you see Jack in this position here, if Belal maybe would have gone to the body lock and kind of wet blanketed him from back control, Merab Dvalishvili style, could have had a bit of success, but he was trying to, you know, damage Jack because he was losing the round, and again didn't have any success with his wrestling. So if we go into round 3, you can just see not a whole lot of chain, I mean no chain wrestling from Belal Muhammad, right? And that's where Makhachev's very different. Makhachev's very, very different, because he will chain wrestle hard. So as we progress through the fight, I want to start talking about my big concern for Jack in this matchup. So you can see barely any takedown attempts in round 3. He leaves it right till the end of the round to shoot a takedown. Even after Jack hit the elbow, he was able to get back up. Very, very nice. So as we get into round 4, I'm going to start talking about my concerns for Jack in this matchup. And there's 2 major concerns for me, because as you can see, his defensive wrestling is pretty good. His takedown defense is pretty good. So as we get into round 4, it's about time. So we said a lot of nice things about Jack. It's about time we talked about a few little red flags that we need to consider in this one. So the first red flag, we've kind of touched on it. We know that he has made huge improvements to his takedown defense from the Burns and the Hafez fight, but they're all single shot entries from Belal. There's no chain wrestling. So when Makhachev starts to transition, you know, from the takedown entry to 4 or 5 different takedown attempts in the same motion, when he's got control of the body or control of a leg, how does Jack deal with that? We don't really know, because he hasn't had to deal with that type of wrestling against Burns, Belal or Hafez. The second issue I've got with Maddalena, and you're going to see it now as we get into rounds 4 and 5, is whilst his takedown defense has improved a lot, what happens when he's on his back? Because I'd be very surprised if he didn't find himself on his back a good amount against Makhachev, because Makhachev's a far higher level grappler than basically anyone ever. And so Makhachev has the wrestling to get him down. And whenever we've seen Maddalena on his back, he's looked very weak off his back. Very bad. Like I say, I don't really want to go back, watch the Hafez and the Burns fights if I can help it, because it's just going to extend the length of this breakdown. You guys are busy, don't want to waste your time. But I do need to illustrate how bad Maddalena is off his back, because what you might find, there is a chance that Makhachev just goes full fucking wet blanket, and this fight ends up looking like Chimaev versus Duplessis, because Della Maddalena is very, very weak off his back, and if his defensive wrestling can't deal with Makhachev's chain wrestling, this fight could be a total shutout. Maddalena on his back is not a pretty sight, and we will show you a little bit of footage to illustrate exactly what I mean. As we progress through the footage. So you can see takedown entry very high up above Maddalena's hips, so it's going to be very difficult for Belal to get takedowns shooting above Maddalena's hip height, but this is the first bit of chain wrestling we see from Belal. Obviously, every takedown up until this point has been kind of a single shot takedown attempt, but it's the first little bit of chain wrestling we see from Belal, and you can see he's having a bit of success with it. You know, he's got the body lock here. You know, he's not scoring a whole lot with this position, but he does have control of Jack at the moment, and he's looking for the outside trip there. You know, Jack's very physically imposing in these positions, but a little bit of chain wrestling there from Belal. If we keep going, another takedown entry coming up. Single leg to double leg. Again, Jack just shows him strong hips, and he's very strong. He just out-muscles Belal, but then you start to see Belal get to the chain wrestling again. Little bit of hustle, little bit of chain wrestling. And all of a sudden, Jack's a little bit less convincing in these positions. Like that single shot takedown entry is very good. But all of a sudden, see Belal start to have a little bit of success with his grappling. So we go into round 5. Into round 5. Here we go. Into round 5. We skip through. Here we go. So this is where it takes until the 5th round to actually see any issues with Maddalena, but you do start to see a few issues with him here. So Belal gets an ugly takedown and straight into half guard, right? Now, for me, Jack looks very weak off his back here. He's kind of not in the worst position because he's not a million miles away from the cage, which he could use to scoot his butt. He could scoot his butt over to the cage, try and scoot his butt over to the cage and start the wall walk. But just like the Burns, just like the Hafez fights, he looks very, very weak off his back here. And Belal holds him down pretty easily from half guard. Now, you know, Jack finds himself on the bottom in half guard. About 3 minutes, 20 seconds left to go in round 5. So if we hit play, he's been on the ground for a minute at this point. About a minute. And then he just kind of bucks Belal off and stands back up. I'm just surprised he was able to do that. He just kind of did it with strength, to be honest with you. But then here you can see he gets taken right back down with the suplex. And it's a messy takedown, so Jack, you know, has an opportunity to get to his knees and stand back up, but kind of just flops to his back. And in this 5th round, in these grappling positions, I started to think to myself, how different this fight could have been if from the first round, Belal Muhammad was more aggressive at pursuing the takedown and used a bit more chain wrestling. And so in the context of this fight against Makhachev, I'm thinking to myself, Makhachev's probably not going to get those initial takedown entries, but if he's smart enough to chain wrestle, he could probably get Maddalena down pretty easily, and Maddalena does look like the kind of guy that's pretty easy to control. So we'll move on and just take a very quick look at the Gilbert Burns fight, where you can see more weakness on the back, on the ground, for Mr. Maddalena. And also, guys, how cool is this fight library aspect of the research tool, where you've got links to all these fights. If you want to watch one of them, just click the link. You go watch it. It's the perfect research tool. I can say it's perfect because I built it myself. Very expensive, very time consuming, but it works great. So yeah, if you join my community, join my website, get access to this tools, UFC research tool, and it'll speed your research up a lot. show you some interesting insights, give you everything in one place, everything you need. So anyway, we're going to quickly skip through this one. This fight's good just because it shows you a bit more of the issues with Maddalena's ground game. Because we saw, fantastic takedown defense for the most part against Belal. This fight shows some issues for Jack on the ground. So that's what I'm talking about with chain wrestling, right? So with Belal Muhammad, for the most part, when he was shooting takedowns, Jack would stuff the initial entry, and then Belal would just give up on the takedown and go back to striking. Gilbert Burns illustrates the point that I'm trying to make about how difficult Jack may find the fight against Makhachev, because Makhachev's more likely to chain wrestle, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. So Burns shoots a single leg here, and because Jack has got good takedown defense, he deals with the single leg just fine, feeds him the single leg, but then Gilbert immediately goes to the inside trip. And that's where Jack gets taken down. It's the chain wrestling, right? The chain wrestling's the killer. Now he gets back up, which is great, but then more chain wrestling, right? Gilbert doesn't let him off the hook. Tries to get the back. And again, Jack stands back up, but Gilbert stays on him. Stays with that chain wrestling. And again, I don't want to make this breakdown super long, but you get to see Jack's defense when it comes to chain wrestling much more in this fight than we did in the Belal Muhammad fight. So we will skim through. Obviously, if you want to do more in-depth research, just go watch this fight in its entirety. But there you go, more chain wrestling. Fully commit to that double leg. Not abandoning the takedown on the first sign of resistance like we got from Belal. Into round 2. Single leg, looks for the inside trip, harder to get that time because Jack was ready for it, because he used the exact same chain combination early in round 1. But you can see Burns doesn't let him off the hook, keeps control of the head, persists with the takedown, keeps going. Jack does a good job of defending himself, but Gilbert won't let him off the hook, sticking to him like glue. So you can see Jack is a good defensive wrestler, but you can get him down. And obviously Makhachev, much higher level wrestler than both Burns and Belal. Nice double leg there as he turns the corner. Jack very strong though, gets to his knees, pops back up. Just very nice chain wrestling from Gilbert. This is what Belal didn't do. Don't ask me why, but he didn't do it. No chain wrestling from... what's that guy's name again? No chain wrestling from that guy. And Jack doing a good job of creating scrambles, defend himself and make Burns work to establish a dominant position, but eventually high level grappler like Burns gets the back, gets that body triangle locked in. Then round 3. Again, you can see good takedown defense from Jack. Nice double leg entry there from Gilbert. Tries to upset his balance, but great balance from Maddalena to stay upright there. But look at the chain wrestling. Transitions from that single leg to the double leg. Maddalena tries to hit a switch. Burns won't give up on it. He's still got that body lock grip. Burns just hustles. Sticks to him like glue, right? And you can imagine Makhachev doing this, right? You can imagine Makhachev chain wrestling, getting to that body lock, sticking to Maddalena like glue. And like Maddalena is showing here, he's not easy to control. But if you chain wrestle, you can have a lot more success and neutralize that dangerous striking. My question is, can Maddalena defend himself like this in the same way he did against Burns and also against Belal, where it was very difficult for both Burns and Belal to establish a dominant position for any amount of time? And he did a really good job of scrambling relentlessly and making him exert a lot of energy to get to the positions like this where they can control him. And if he is able to make Makhachev work this hard, can he tire Makhachev out? Right? And then kind of take over late and catch Makhachev with something late like he did here against Gilbert Burns? Or is Makhachev just a different level to Belal and Burns and just fucking drowns Maddalena on the ground in the same way that Chimaev did to Duplessis? That's the question, right? What does my gut say? What does my gut say? My gut says this fight is really going to come down to how much grappling do we get from Islam Makhachev. Because what we've seen from Makhachev in both the Volkanovski and Poirier fights is that he likes to stand and bang. Doesn't mind a scrap on the feet. We saw long periods of striking in the Volkanovski and Poirier fights. And, you know, fighters often let their ego get in the way of making the best decision. The decision that gives them the best chance of winning. And, you know, it would not be smart for Makhachev to stand and strike with Maddalena this weekend. I think it'd be a big mistake. He might even get himself knocked out. So, if Makhachev comes out, spams takedowns early, you know, or uses takedowns strategically to steal rounds, put rounds in the bank early, I think he'll very likely win because his cardio is decent. So with a grappling heavy game plan, he could probably win the first 2 rounds, then find a way to nick one of the 3rd, 4th or 5th rounds to take a decision win. My concern for Makhachev in this fight is if he doesn't grapple his dick off and tries to keep it standing and chip away at Maddalena on the feet to conserve energy, if he loses if he loses one of the first 2 rounds, I think Maddalena is one of those guys that's really going to pour it on in the 3rd, 4th and 5th. So I think it's very important Makhachev wins the first 2 rounds. If he doesn't, he's leaving himself a lot of work to do in the second half of the fight, where Maddalena is going to be very dangerous, very difficult to control, because Makhachev will be more tired in the second half of the fight. So for me, this one comes down to how strong Makhachev starts. And in order to start strong, he's going to have to grapple hard from the off, which he didn't really do against Volkanovski or Poirier, which is a bit of a concern if you're betting Makhachev this weekend. Every single fight that we break down, every single fight that we bet, we often talk about the choices, the game plans, the strategies the fighters will make. And that's the most difficult aspect of pre-fight betting. You never know what version of a fighter you're going to get. You never know what game plan and strategy they're going to use. All you can do is research their past fights and make the best decision possible based on the information you've got available, based on what they've done in the past. But really, there's no way to know. There's no way to be sure. And that's why live betting is so much more profitable, so much more lucrative, so much better than pre-fight betting. Because with live betting, you can see exactly what you're getting for your money before you put your money in danger. And that's how, over a very, very, very long period of time, we've been able to produce a profit chart that looks as good as this. It's the reason we make a profit on 73% of months, which is absurd. The fact we make a profit on almost 70% of UFC events, it's absurd. This is a level of performance and consistency that you don't really get in sports betting. But we're able to achieve it because live betting on the UFC, it's a very unique thing, a very unique opportunity. And for guys like me that put a lot of time and effort into the research, it's very lucrative. Very, very lucrative. And the reason why live betting on the UFC is so much better than pre-fight betting on the UFC is because you can get exactly, or you can see exactly what version of a fighter you're getting before you put your money in danger, right? If you think about Ricky Simone last week against Rony Barcelos, he's facing a 37-year-old Brazilian who has shown in the past he can be taken down and controlled. He's also shown in the past that he slows his fights we're on. We know Ricky is a strong wrestler. We know Ricky is a cardio machine. Going into that fight, you can research it, and you know all Ricky has to do is grapple his dick off, wrestle his dick off early, tire Barcelos out, and he'll win easily. But what did Ricky do? Barely shot a takedown. In fact, if you look at the stats, Ricky shot half the amount of takedowns that he usually shoots on average. I think he shot 6 takedowns, didn't really fully commit to those 6 either. And he usually shoots between 11 and 13 takedowns per fight. So Ricky didn't grapple anywhere near as much as he should have done. As a result, lost a close fight and got outstruck against a better striker. didn't take a rocket scientist to work out that if Ricky tried to stand and strike against a better striker, he was probably going to lose. That fight, you know, if you would have just waited for live betting, you could have saved yourself a loss on pre-fight betting. I should take my own advice on that one, because obviously I lost on Ricky Simone. But point being, that's a really good example of how fighters quite often don't perform in the way that gives them the best chance of winning. GSP said the fighting was 90% mental. That fight's a very good example of it. Ultimately, Simone made poor decisions, poor game planning, poor strategy, and lost the fight that should have been a pretty easy fight for him stylistically. So now we've got this matchup, Makhachev versus Maddalena, and it's quite similar, where we're sat here going, if Makhachev grapples hard from the first round, this is going to be a very difficult fight for Maddalena. But we've seen against Poirier and Volkanovski, Makhachev likes to mix it up on the feet quite a bit. So for me, this is one of those fights that's perfect for live betting, because you can see exactly what version of Makhachev you're going to get before putting your money in danger. If Makhachev comes out the gate grappling his dick off early, you know there's probably not a betting opportunity there, because Makhachev's probably going to use his grappling to dominate. But what you can do is obviously protect yourself from taking a high-risk gamble, a flyer on Maddalena pre-fight on the basis that Makhachev may not grapple, like against Poirier, like against Volkanovski. For those of you that are thinking of betting Maddalena, just by live betting this one, save a little bit of cash, right? Avoid a Duplessis versus Chimaev situation. How many of you lost money rolling the dice on Duplessis only to see him get dominated for 5 rounds? Could have avoided that happening. Would have saved live betting that fight, seeing how the first round went, seeing if Chimaev was going to choose to grapple or not. Then on the flip side, there's a lot of people probably thinking about betting big on Makhachev this weekend, or throwing him in a parlay or an accumulator because of how terrible Maddalena looked against Burns and Hafez at moments in those grappling positions. But if you bet Makhachev this weekend, if you look at the implied probability, you know, you're putting your money in a lot of danger. In order to get any value on Makhachev this weekend, you've got to give him like an 80% chance of winning, which is very difficult to do in a fight like this. I don't see how anyone can justify betting Makhachev at these odds. There's just no value there. You know, if you save this one for live betting, worst case scenario, you're gonna end up passing on a bet that had shit odds anyway, right? Say you pass on this fight and save it for live betting, and Makhachev, you know, fucking grapples his ass off and dominates Maddalena. Well, you didn't really miss out on that good of an opportunity because the odds were shit anyway. But say you wait for live betting. Maybe Makhachev has a tough first round, then goes do his grappling in round 2, and maybe you can bet Makhachev at better odds. Or maybe you can avoid taking a loss if he tries to stand and strike with Maddalena like he did against Volkan Poirier and ends up losing, ends up getting knocked out. Maybe you can avoid a loss. This fight's a good example of one that's very good for live betting, not so good for pre-fight, because the odds are shit on Makhachev. There's no upside in betting him. And on Maddalena, if you bet him, you're basically betting on a guy that has shown his ground game's a bit shit, and this weekend he's fighting probably the best grappler ever, maybe. Probably him. It's either Makhachev, Khabib, or Chimaev, right? Those are the best 3. No debate for me. So, it's tough. For me personally, I'm going to pass on this one. If you really, really, really want to bet it, I would take Maddalena just because of the odds. Let the odds do the work for you. Not much upside in betting Makhachev's a big favourite. Bet $1,000 on Makhachev, you win $340 profit. I mean, that ain't even enough to buy a Nintendo Switch. Doesn't make much sense to me. Bet $1,000 on Maddalena, and you get $2,300 profit. That gives me a far better risk to reward ratio, but I wouldn't expect it to win. But then I wouldn't want to put up $1,000 to not even earn enough to buy a fucking Nintendo Switch. Or the way it's going in the UK right now, a loaf of bread, because inflation's crazy. So yeah, that's kind of how I see this fight. And I hope you found that useful. But before we wrap this one up, we're going to move on to the prop bets and the over-unders and all that type of shit. Then we're going to break down Valentina Shevchenko versus Weili Zhang. So the over-under on this one is in the even money odds range. Personally, I think this fight's more likely to go to a decision just because both guys are absolutely tough as nails. Maddalena has shown that he can scramble like crazy and defend himself on the ground. Both guys have shown they're pretty durable on the feet. Even when both guys get tired, they're tough enough to keep pushing and trying to hang in there. For me personally, I don't like betting on overs in 5-round fights just because 25 minutes is an eternity in the octagon and it's a very chaotic, crazy place to be. So I wouldn't bet that personally, but I lean more towards the over. In terms of the prop bets on this one, I think the most likely outcome is Makhachev by decision, but the odds are really shit on that. 3.0 plus 200, not great. Maddalena by knockout or TKO, not great either really. Those odds are pretty steep. What is Makhachev by decision? Oh, sorry guys, I'm getting spammed. I thought I turned that off. Apologies. There we go. So yeah, that's how I see this fight. You know, let me know what you think on Discord or in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube. I think it's about time we moved on to the next one. Now let's break down the fight between Valentina Shevchenko and Weili Zhang. So we'll start off by taking a look at the odds. We can see that Shevchenko is the slight favourite. Average odds are about 1.74, which is going to be minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. And if we take a look at the odds on Zhang, she's around an average of 2.15, which is going to be plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. So we'll kick things off by looking at the fighter comparison tool. Both girls are in the even money odds range. So if you can just lean 60-40 one way or the other, you can get a nice margin of value here because, you know, even if you just lean 60-40 one way or the other, you get a little bit of value on Valentina. Ideally, you'd want to be capping it at closer to 65-70% though to get a really good margin. So in the fighter comparison tool, we can see both girls are about the same age, which was a bit of a surprise to me. I thought Zhang would be younger, but Valentina and Zhang are about the same age, also about the same size. You can see that Valentina a little bit taller, slightly longer reach and leg reach, but I think what Zhang lacks in length and reach, she more than makes up for in power and physicality. So I think that kind of balances out. In terms of the stats, this is where things get quite interesting. So Zhang lands 64% more strikes per minute, which I thought was super interesting because obviously this fight does stay standing while Valentina is very technical and very good defensively. Zhang lands a hell of a lot more. Now, granted, it's not going to be easy to land on Valentina compared to a lot of Zhang's past performances or past opponents because of how good defensively Valentina is, how good her footwork and movement is. But this shows Zhang throws a very, very high volume of strikes. In terms of accuracy, I also thought this was interesting. You'd think Valentina would be a lot more accurate, but they're actually about the same. In terms of striking defense, Valentina 9% better striking defense, which you kind of expect because she does measure distance very well. She's got much better footwork and movement. Both of them shoot roughly the same amount of takedowns per 15 minutes. You can see that Zhang has slightly better takedown defense. Both girls difficult to take down, but I've got to be honest, based on Zhang's last fight against Tatiana Suarez, I think Zhang is entering that elite level takedown defense, almost impossible to take down. So if this fight does go to the ground, you would think it would be Zhang initiating the takedowns. Valentina's takedown defense is 75% as well. I will say I would put an asterisk next to this number. What I've noticed is as Shevchenko has got older, her balance isn't quite as good, so she's easier to take down now than she was earlier in her career. So it's probably not 75% anymore, but Zhang's still improving in this area in my opinion. Her takedown offense against Suarez was absolutely fantastic. Now the strike distribution chart is an interesting one because it shows that Zhang is the more diverse striker out of the two, which did surprise me. I thought Valentina threw a lot of range-finding kicks to the legs and the body, but the stats actually say differently, and the vast majority of her strikes are actually to the head. Zhang mixes it up much more and throws a very high volume of strikes to the legs. 26% doesn't sound like a lot, but 26% is well above average for strike distribution to the legs in the UFC. So Zhang mixes it up a lot more. Whether she's going to be able to land to the legs of Valentina with, you know, how good Valentina's movement is, how good she is at controlling the distance, I'm not so sure. But obviously the leg attacks will set up the head strikes for Zhang, and it will also potentially weaken the lower body of Valentina, making it more difficult for her to stuff takedowns if Zhang does shoot in. So in terms of how these two match up from a technical point of view, we've already kind of broken them down when it comes to striking, where you've got, the very good defense, very good distance management, that sniper style of Shevchenko, where she really picks her shots and throw those big single shots, those big counters, compared to Zhang, who's very aggressive. We can already see from the stats, she throws a very high volume of strikes and hits harder, in my opinion, than Shevchenko as well. I know Shevchenko's got more highlight reel knockouts on her record, but they tend to be landing big singular, power shots, counters out of nowhere. In terms of, power per strike and damage inflicted per strike, I definitely think that goes to Zhang. She's the far more powerful and physically imposing fighter. So on the feet, for me personally, while Shevchenko is the more technical, I think she's really going to struggle to outwork Zhang. Zhang is a lot more aggressive. She's tough. She's durable. She likes to be the aggressor. She likes to be the one coming forward. My main concern for Zhang in this fight is that when she does get a bit tired, she does get very sloppy, and we've seen a real sloppiness to her, in her fights against Zhang and Yan, and also against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, the first Jędrzejczyk fight in the second half of the fight. What is going on with all these duplicate entries? I'm not too sure about that. We will have to fix it. But yeah, Zhang does have a tendency to slow down and get a bit sloppy on the feet, which is not good. So in terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, I lean towards Zhang. I think that volume and that aggression is going to be difficult for Shevchenko to outwork, unless Shevchenko scores a couple knockdowns like she did in the Manon Fiorot fight, or, knocks Weili Zhang out. I think it's going to be very difficult for Shevchenko to outpoint Zhang and win rounds on the feet. In terms of grappling, in this area, I give Zhang quite a huge advantage, and I think grappling could be where this fight is decided. The main issue with both these girls is that they're both very weak off their back. If you put either of them on their back, they're very easy to hold down and control. You can see that if you go and watch the first round of Zhang's fight against Tatiana Suarez, or many fights throughout Shevchenko's career where she's found herself on the bottom. If we take a look at her record, she spent a bit of time on the bottom in the Grasso fights, just very, very weak on the bottom. If she finds herself on the bottom, she usually struggles pretty bad there. And so the way I would look at this fight from a grappling point of view is, if we know both girls are very weak off their back, the one who has the edge is going to be the one that is firstly more likely to get the fight to the ground, and secondly less likely to be taken down, right? So if you think about it logically, out of the two, who's less likely to be taken down? Well, that would be Zhang, because she has better takedown defense. The stats show it, 94 takedown defense versus 75% takedown defense, but we've also said Zhang's takedown defense is getting better from fight to fight, while at 37 years old, Valentina's balance is starting to go and it's looking worse. So Zhang's the more difficult to take down out of the two. And who is the more likely to get takedowns out of the two? Well, for me, again, that would be Weili Zhang, because with Zhang, she's more powerful, she's stronger, she's more physically imposing, she's got a heavier top game. Most of Valentina's takedown attempts come from funky judo trips and throws, which we've seen, a very, very mostly ineffective against Zhang. Difficult to get Zhang down off judo trips and throws. So for me personally, I would give Zhang the edge on the feet, and I would give Zhang a pretty big edge when it comes to grappling, and so I heavily lean towards Zhang in this fight. My main concern with Zhang is that she does get very tired and sloppy in the second half of fights, and so if the fight does go into the second half of the fight, Zhang might be too tired to get takedowns, and if she becomes very sloppy on the feet, that's when Valentina can light her up. So it's a very good fight. I do lean towards Zhang, but her cardio is a real issue for me. I'm going to stick to live betting on this one. Like I say, with how well matched both these girls are, I think it's very likely to go deep. They're both in the even money odds range. I think they're both likely to win rounds. I think they're both likely to have a bit of success on the feet. I think, Shevchenko could land a couple knockdowns and land a couple big shots on Zhang with how sloppy Zhang gets on the feet. She did it to Man and Furo. I also think Zhang's going to get some takedowns and rack up a bit of top control. So for me, this is a very close one. Could go either way. I'm going to stick to live betting on this one, and very confident we'll make a profit live betting this weekend. We do most weeks. As you can see, we make a profit on almost 70% of events, which is absurd. Very, very consistent. So it's a great card, and I don't personally see the need to place a bet on this one pre-fight, because like I say, I don't want to bet Zhang, because if she starts to tire in the second half of the fight, Shevchenko can light her up. And I don't want to bet Shevchenko because she's very weak off her back. And the fact that Zhang lands 64% more strikes per minute, that's going to be problematic for Shevchenko in trying to match that volume. So in terms of the over-under on this one, we can see that the odds are very, very heavily weighted towards this fight going to a decision. Personally, if you want to bet the over on this one, I would just play the odds. There's no upside in betting the over at these odds. I would just take the fight not to go to a decision on the basis that both these girls, are dangerous. Zhang might get knocked out with how sloppy she gets on the feet, how bad defensive she gets on the feet. And on the flip side, Shevchenko might get put in a bad position on the ground and stopped on the ground like she did against Alexa Grasso in the second fight. So, yeah, very, very interesting matchup. And, definitely lean towards Zhang. In terms of the prop bets on this one, have a quick look at the props. I think most likely outcome is going to be Zhang by decision. But for me, those odds are probably going to be unplayable. Yeah, Zhang by decision, very tough. So yeah, I would give that a miss. Hope you found that useful. Let's move on to the next fight. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Sean Brady versus Michael Morales. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see both guys are in the even money odds range, with Brady as the slight favourite at average odds of about 1.72, which is going to be minus 139. For an implied probability of 58%. Morales, 2.13 underdog, which is going to be plus 113 for an implied probability of 47%. So we take a look at the fighter comparison tool. We can see that Morales is 6 years younger, but I actually think that might work against Morales in this one, just because he is very young, very inexperienced, and Brady is in his prime at 32 years old. You can see that Morales is a bit taller than Brady, but has a huge 7-inch reach advantage. And we know that fighters with a 7-inch reach advantage win around 67% of the time. So that's a very, very nice advantage to have. In terms of the stats, you can see that Morales lands 40% more strikes per minute. But Brady is not going to want to be on the feet here, especially giving up that 7-inch reach advantage. We know this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Brady has the advantage on the ground. Morales has the advantage on the feet. So won't worry about that too much. We know Brady's outgunned when it comes to striking. Brady is a little bit more accurate, which is a surprise, but not by a whole lot. Also better defensively, not by a whole lot, but we can start to see the grappling stats favour Brady a little. He shoots an average of 3.62 takedowns per 15 minutes, which is a lot. That is well above average compared to Morales' 1. Both guys very difficult to take down, although 89% takedown offense from Morales is a little bit misleading, and I will explain why shortly. And you can see Brady much more aggressive with the submission attempts on the ground. In terms of the strike distribution chart, not a whole lot of difference between the two. Brady throws a decent amount of leg kicks, to be fair. 15% leg kicks is above average in the UFC, to be fair, but not a huge volume. So for the most part, both these guys headhunt, although with the reach differential, perhaps Brady will go to the legs more in this fight than he would usually. Now, in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, this is one of those fights where it's kind of impossible to predict because we haven't seen Morales defend any takedowns. And this is why, stats are only as useful as they are interpreted. On paper, the 89% takedown defense stat looks really impressive, but nobody's tried to take him down, really. If we look at his record, he made his UFC debut against Trevin Giles in January 2022. The fight ended in 4 minutes, and we know Trevin Giles isn't a strong wrestler. Adam Fugit isn't a strong wrestler. Max Griffin isn't a strong wrestler. Jake Matthews isn't a strong wrestler. Neither's Magny, and the fight ended in 4 minutes. Burns is a strong wrestler, but the fight ended in 3.5 minutes, so wasn't enough time for Burns to try and get the fight to the ground. So you can see from the takedowns defended stat here on the Neil Magny fight that Magny shot 2 takedowns and Morales stuffed both takedowns. He went 2 for 2. But there's a big difference between the offensive wrestling of Neil Magny and Sean Brady. Sean Brady's a far better offensive wrestler. So that's why Morales' takedown defense stat looks amazing at 89%. It's because he hasn't really fought any strong wrestlers. And it's always important to check that when you are, comparing stats. So this fight's an impossible one to predict because we don't know anything about Morales' takedown defense and ground game. Obviously, he has an advantage on the feet. He's, more technical than Brady, hits harder, has a nice 7-inch reach advantage, but for all we know, his takedown defense and ground game could be absolutely garbage, and Brady could take him down and completely dominate him on the ground like he did to Leon Edwards. We've really got no idea. If you're asking me for my opinion on this, to kind of guess, I think this could be a very easy fight for Brady, potentially, simply because Michael Morales doesn't train at a gym that is well known for producing guys that have good takedown defense and a good ground game. He trains with a lot of Mexican fighters, Venezuelans, Ecuadorians, things like that, at a predominantly striking based gym. So even though he's big and strong and physically imposing, iron sharpens iron, and I don't feel Morales has really spent a whole lot of time in a gym that would enable him to develop the kind of MMA grappling that you would need to stop someone like Sean Brady. I mean, if we look at Brady's record, dominated Leon Edwards, completing 5 of 7 takedowns in that fight. Very impressive. He did better than Usman. He did better than Colby Covington against Edwards. Shot 17 takedowns against Gilbert Burns, landed 7 of them. Shot 5 takedowns against Burns, landed all of them. Shot 8 takedowns against Michael Chiesa. Shot 9 takedowns against Ismail Nordiev. So you can see Brady shoots a lot of takedowns in fights, and he gets he completes more than half of them usually. The Gilbert Burns fight, the exception to the rule. Without knowing anything about Morales' grappling, takedown offense, it's probably not great, and so potentially a very easy fight for Brady. There's no logic behind betting Morales in this fight. If you bet Morales, you're just straight up gambling. I mean, if you bet Brady, you're kind of straight up gambling as well. But I feel if you do bet Brady, at least you've got the most likely outcome on your side. Ultimately, a guy like Morales, 26 years old, never fought a grappler of Brady's level. Never really fought a wrestler in the UFC, trains at a predominantly striking based gym. Most likely outcome at 26, takedown defense and ground game is probably not good. He might be the unicorn, might be the exception to the rule, but betting on most likely outcomes when 2 fighters are in the even money odds range is a far easier way to make money long term than betting on the least likely outcome in the even money odds range. So if you want to bet this fight, you have to take Brady. Morales is a terrible bet. Anyone that tells you to bet Michael Morales, be very concerned about their brain function, because there's no basis for a bet on Morales in this fight. It just doesn't make sense. He could win easily, could knock Brady out, could be the best grappler in the history of MMA, but we have no idea because we haven't seen it. For me, it's Brady or pass. So in terms of the over-under and the props, you can't really form a strong opinion on the over-under or the props, because again, without knowing how good Morales' takedown offense and ground game is, we don't know how good he's going to be at defending himself on the ground. We know Brady's very dangerous with the back takes, very dangerous with the chokes, the submission game. Morales is like white belt level on the ground. He might just get taken down and drowned, submitted pretty quick. So impossible fight for betting. Easy pass, give it a miss. Don't put your money in danger. Save it for live betting, and hopefully we can make some money there. So let's move on to the next one. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Leon Edwards versus Carlos Prates. Old school versus new school. Edwards, the former champ. Carlos Prates, the brand new shiny thing in the welterweight division. Also a big favourite. Leon getting no respect here. Are the odds accurate? How do we see this one playing out? Let's get into it. So Prates is a 1.54 favourite, which is going to be minus 184 for an implied probability of 65%. Take a look at the odds on Edwards. He's a 2.47 underdog, which is going to be plus 147 for an implied probability of 41%. So bringing up the fighter comparison tool, both guys are about the same age. Both of them are about the same height. They have the same leg reach, but Carlos Prates has a 4-inch reach advantage, which gives him a slight edge, nothing major. In terms of the other stats, you can see that Carlos Prates lands 37% more strikes per minute, but it is worth noting Edwards has fought a far higher level of opponent than Prates, and as soon as Prates faced a step up in competition against Ian Gary, he didn't land anywhere near that volume. And we're going to have a look at the stats to kind of illustrate that point. Both of them are about the same in terms of accuracy. Edwards slightly better defensively. I don't think grappling is going to matter, to be honest with you. The stats are all kind of even. I don't think it's going to matter. This should be a stand-up fight. In terms of the strike distribution, very interesting. They both mix it up a lot. Generally speaking, what you'll see in the UFC, most fighters, the vast majority of fighters, land 80% or more strikes to the head. You can see these guys mix it up and throw a lot of strikes to the legs and the body, which makes them dangerous because it sets up their power head strikes. It's one of the reasons why, Kamaru Usman was sent to the Shadow Realm, headshot dead. Edwards set it up with leg and body strikes earlier in the fight, and he was able to land the kill shot and win the title to Usman's head with the head kick. So they do mix it up a lot. Prates likes a lot of combinations of the body, a lot of boxing combinations to soften them up. It'll be harder to get there with Edwards because Edwards' movement and defense is a lot better. But both guys mix it up a lot, which is great. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, the Ian Gary fight is a very interesting one because for me personally, for the first 10 minutes, Prates looked like a deer in the headlights. He couldn't deal with the footwork, the movement, the technique of Gary. Gary just kind of picked him off from the outside, chipped away at him, kind of schooled him. In the second half of the fight, Gary slowed under the pressure a little bit, and as Prates started to find his range, he obviously finished strong. But in the first 3 rounds, Prates looked out of his depth against a more technical striker. And so what we've seen from Prates in the UFC so far, if you take a look at his record, so he made his debut in February 2024 against Trevin Giles. Then he fought Charles Radke, Li Jingliang, Neil Magny, Ian Gary and Jeff Neal. Obviously, Gary is a much higher level than these guys, with the exception of Jeff Neal, right? Jeff Neal got brutally KO'd. Fight ended in 5 minutes is what it is, yeah? But what we noticed, there's a trend if you go and watch the Giles, Radke, Lee, Magny and Neal fights, in that they all struggled with the forward pressure of Prates. So Prates is really good at coming forward, taking control of the centre of the octagon, putting you on the back foot and walking you down. He's very, very good at that. And it forces guys to fight in an uncomfortable range, under pressure, reacting to what he's doing. And that's very, very difficult to deal with. And so they panic and they eat big shots and he lands combinations of the body and they wilt and he gets them out of there. What was different about the Ian Gary fight? Gary was very well prepared for Prates' pressure fighting style. We know Ian Gary is predominantly a counter striker, and he quite likes to fight on the back foot, chipping away at you from the outside. So when Prates would come forward, march forward, take control of the centre of the octagon, try and be aggressive, trying to drag Gary into big exchanges, Gary would just touch him, circle away, not get into those big exchanges, and not panic. And that frustrated Prates, because what Prates is used to doing is putting tons of pressure on his opponents. They kind of panic. They start trying to, stand their ground and plant their feet and throw big shots to back Prates up and get respect in there and alleviate the pressure they're under. That's where he thrives, in those exchanges, and he just breaks guys down and makes them wilt in those positions. Gary just played the role of Matador. You know, he used Prates as a dumb bull, chipped away at him from the outside, and Prates really didn't have an answer till at least the midway point in the fight. Because it was a 5-rounder, it ended up being a competitive fight. But if it was a 3-rounder, Gary would have won the fight dominantly and decisively, and Prates' stock would have gone down big time. So this is an interesting matchup because Edwards is a very high-level striker. He's been a UFC champion. And this is going to be one of the first fights in a while where Edwards won't have to worry about being taken down. If you look at the run of guys that he's faced, you know, Kamaru Usman a million times. I don't know why my tool is doing that. It's creating loads of duplicate fights. I need to fix that. But if you look at, you know, the fighters that he's been facing, Usman twice, Colby Covington, Belal Muhammad, Sean Brady, they're all grapplers. And so it's very, very difficult for Edwards to fully focus on his striking and let his hands go when he's constantly at risk of being taken down, because it'll disrupt his ability to get into a rhythm. Prates probably ain't going to be trying to get Edwards to the ground. You know, out of the two, it's probably more likely Edwards tries to take Prates down. But personally, this is more likely going to be a stand-up fight. Neither guy ever really tries to take their opponents down. And in a stand-up fight, you know, it's been a long time since we saw Edwards in a purely stand-up fight. He's been fighting a lot of wrestlers. And so, for me personally, I do think this could be one of those y'all must have forgot fights where Prates potentially got a bit exposed against Gary in the first half of the Gary matchup. He's now facing a former world champion, formerly one of the best strikers in the division. Maybe still is the best striker in the division. Who knows? Who fucking knows, right? Who knows how Edwards is going to look in 2025 when he doesn't have guys, you know, trying to hump his leg to death. So it's an interesting one because Edwards is a dangerous counter striker. He's got good footwork. He's got good movement. He's unlikely to panic. And the thing with Edwards is, you know, he's a very dangerous counter striker. I know Prates is tough. I know he is, you know, got a lot of power. He's dangerous in his own right. But against Ian Gary, there wasn't too much risk for Prates coming forward. For the most part, Ian Gary is a volume striker, and I know Edwards has got a lot of decisions on his record. Edwards doesn't have a whole lot of knockouts. You look at his record, you know, he's mostly a decisionator. If you go further back, lots of decisions, right? Hell of a lot of decisions. He is a decisionator, I'll give you that. But when you're as aggressive as Prates in coming forward, you are prone to big counters and getting knocked out. So there is more danger for Prates using that ultra aggressive, reckless pressure fighting style against someone like Leon Edwards compared to someone like Ian Gary. So it's a very good fight. I actually lean Edwards in this one, and he is a very tempting bet. It's hard to bet against Carlos Prates because I do think he's very good. I love how aggressive he is. I love how dangerous he is. But if you go and watch those first 3 rounds against Gary, he doesn't really do very much at all. Kind of got, I hate to use the word exposed, but he kind of did get exposed a little bit. Like, if you look at his striking stats, he only landed 26 head strikes in 25 minutes, which is terrible. That's fucking terrible. To only land 26 head strikes in 25 minutes is a joke, to be quite frank. So it shows how much he struggled on the feet against Gary, and it shows that, you know, when he starts face a step up in competition and face these higher level strikers, he might come unstuck. Obviously, fighting nerds are in a bit of trouble recently. You know, Gene Silva lost, Rafi lost, Baralio lost. Will Carlos Prates be the next fighting nerd to suffer a loss? I mean, Norma Dumont should have lost. That was a bad decision against Katlin Vieira. I do favour Edwards here. Very tempting bet. Might bet Edwards this weekend. I might bet Edwards. Prates. Look, like the numbers don't lie, right, guys? 26 head strikes in 25 minutes. Compare that to Jeff Neal, where he landed 17 head strikes in 5 minutes. Compare that to Neil Magny. Only 7 head strikes, to be fair. How about Radke? Only 5 head strikes. So you can see he doesn't land a super high volume of strikes, does he? 3 against Trevin Giles. Doesn't land a whole lot of head strikes. Kind of crazy. A lot of body strikes, a lot of leg strikes. Not a lot of head strikes. I think I favour Edwards. Let me know what you think though on Discord or in the comments below. In terms of the over-under on this one, because of how aggressive and reckless Prates is, you never want to bet on a Prates fight to go to a decision, but my lean is that it'll go to a decision because both guys are so damn good. You know, most of Prates' quick wins inside the distance have been against quite a low level of opponent, and then you see him face a step up in Gary and it goes to a decision. But a big part of the reason why it went to a decision is because Gary doesn't have much power in his hands. So when Prates was aggressive coming forward, the counter shots Gary would land wouldn't be that damaging, wouldn't land with too much KO power, whereas with Edwards is more danger. So I do lean more towards this fight going to a decision, but I would never bet a Prates fight to go to a decision because he draws guys into exchanges, and in a fight like that where guys are being drawn into exchanges, something often gives in the form of someone getting knocked out. So in terms of the prop bets on this one, I think most likely outcome is going to be Edwards by decision. But the odds on Edwards by decision are virtually, well, they're only 30% worse than the odds on Edwards money line. So no need to get greedy and bet the decision, because perhaps Edwards does land a big counter and knock him out, and then you'd be really pissed if you didn't bet Edwards money line, you got greedy and went for the decision. So pass on the props, and if you want to bet this fight, take Edwards straight. Haven't decided if I'm betting him yet. This is one of those cards where I look at it and I'm very confident I'll make a huge profit in live betting. Like, as you can see, we make a profit on the vast majority of UFC events, close to 70% of events, which is nuts. 73% of months are profitable. So for me, I look at a fight like this and I'm like, two tough guys, could go either way. I'll save it for live betting, because with so many good fights on this card, if I just stick to live betting, I'm very, 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 very likely to make a profit. So that is the plan with this one. So hope you found that useful. Now let's move on to the next. Now let's break down the fight between Dariush and Benoit Saint-Denis. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see the Saint-Denis is the favourite at average odds of about 1.52, which is going to be minus 194 for an implied probability of 66%. We take a look at the odds on Dariush. He's a 2.55 underdog, which is going to be plus 155 for an implied probability of 39%. Quite a lot of X factors to go through on this one. So the first being the age gap. We can see Benoit Saint-Denis is 7 years younger than Dariush, and at 36 years old, Dariush is starting to get pretty old now. He's at that stage in his career where for a lightweight, he should be declining a lot from fight to fight. And the thing about Dariush is he does have a lot of miles on the clock. He has been in a lot of wars. He has been knocked down a bunch of times and knocked out. So we know